Lieutenant Daniel Carter woke up to the quiet sound of machines beeping. Someone was watching him, and he could tell they cared about how he was feeling. The medical room on Haven Point Station was very clean and organized. This place helped sick people from different planets work together, even when those planets had been fighting each other just months ago. "Good morning, Lieutenant Carter," said a soft voice with a beautiful accent. "How do you feel today?" Daniel turned his head slowly. Moving didn't hurt as much as it had before. The person talking was a tall woman with pointed ears and skin that seemed to glow a little. She was Vorthani. Her medical clothes showed she was an important doctor. "Better than yesterday, I think," Daniel said. His voice sounded rough from all the medical treatments for the strange radiation that had hurt him. "But I can't remember much from the past few days." "I am Nurse Lyra Kethvani," she said, checking the screens that watched his health. She seemed to really care about helping him get better. "You have been in our care for 6 days. You got very sick from radiation during your spy mission." Daniel tried to remember what happened. He had been checking strange energy signals near the border between their territories. His equipment broke, and he got exposed to radiation that human doctors couldn't fix. They had to bring him to this neutral medical center where Vorthani doctors could treat him. 6 days, Daniel repeated. His mind felt clearer now. So the treatment worked? "The immediate danger is gone," Lyra said, but her face looked worried. "However, something unusual happened during your recovery. We need to talk about it." "Unusual how?" Lyra turned on a privacy shield around his bed so no one could listen to them. "Lieutenant Carter, you have been talking in your sleep. You said things that should be impossible for someone like you to know." Daniel felt cold. "What kind of things?" "Words in ancient Vorthani language. Secret codes that have been lost for hundreds of years. Technical details about systems that most of my own people have never heard of." Lyra looked puzzled and maybe a little scared. "Daniel, may I call you Daniel? Do you know anything about Vorthani culture or government rules?" "Nothing at all. Before this job, I only learned basic things about your people for diplomatic meetings." Daniel tried to think if he had learned any Vorthani information anywhere. "Are you sure I was speaking your language and not just talking nonsense?" "I am sure. And what's more worrying, the words you said were secret codes used to identify people who have authority over very important government systems." Lyra's voice carried meanings that suggested she was thinking about this as fast as he was. "Daniel, in my culture, knowing these codes means either you inherited government authority through your family, or you have other connections that create legal duties." "Legal duties?" "The consort witness bond. Ancient laws that create permanent connections between people who know recognition codes. These codes were designed to find suitable partners for government leaders." Daniel stared at her. His medical recovery had just become much more complicated than radiation treatment. "Are you telling me that my sleep talking somehow triggered alien marriage laws?" "More complex than marriage. The consort witness bond gives shared authority over escape routes, refugee help networks, and defense systems that most Vorthani citizens never access." Lyra checked his medical readings and noticed changes that suggested the bonding process had already started. "Daniel, your unconscious words activated biological linking that cannot be easily undone." "Biological linking?" "Genetic changes that allow you to connect with Vorthani government systems while giving you enhanced abilities needed for organizing large-scale humanitarian operations." Lyra's face grew serious. "The process started automatically when you said the codes, and it will continue whether we make the bond official or try to stop it." Daniel felt pieces clicking together in his mind. His routine medical recovery had accidentally activated alien government rules that neither of them fully understood. And if we make this bond official? Then you gain permanent authority over escape networks that could transport displaced people to safety, while I gain responsibility for making sure that authority serves helping people rather than political advantage. And if we don't make it official? Then the partial bonding process continues without legal framework, potentially creating dangerous instability while failing to give the authority needed to use the systems your unconscious mind has already accessed. Through the medical room's windows, Daniel could see more activity as additional people arrived for what looked like emergency meetings. Both human and Vorthani officials were gathering in numbers that suggested his situation had gotten attention from the highest levels of both civilizations. Lyra, Daniel said quietly. When you say I was saying recognition codes, do you have any idea how I could know information that's supposedly been lost for centuries? There are theories. Genetic memory inherited through family lines that are older than current political boundaries, quantum effects from exposure to ancient Vorthani technology during your mission, or, she paused, studying his face carefully, the possibility that some recognition codes were deliberately preserved in human genetic patterns for reasons that both our peoples have forgotten. Deliberately preserved? The escape routes your unconscious mind accessed were designed to serve displaced people from multiple species, not just Vorthani refugees. If recognition codes were put into human genetics, it might mean cooperation between our peoples that happened before the conflicts that led to our current political separation. Daniel looked around the medical room, noting sophisticated equipment that combined human and Vorthani technologies in ways that suggested cooperation was possible when both species put helping people over political competition. Lyra, he said, his decision beginning to form. If these escape routes could help displaced people from both our species, and if the consort witness bond would give us authority to activate them, then the choice seems obvious regardless of the personal complications. Daniel, you should understand that making the bond official would make you a target for groups that profit from keeping displaced people trapped in exploitable situations. Corporate interests from both species have been preventing efficient refugee resettlement to maintain cheap labor pools. And if we don't make it official, then families continue to suffer in refugee camps and exploitation zones while the systems that could help them remain inaccessible due to incomplete bonding rules. Through his enhanced awareness, which he was beginning to realize was a result of the partial bonding process, Daniel could sense tactical information about forces gathering around the medical facility. Corporate security teams, intelligence operatives, and what appeared to be military contractors were positioning themselves to either exploit or eliminate the consort witness bond before it could be made legal. Lyra, Daniel said, understanding the scope of what they faced. I think we need to have a much longer conversation about these escape routes because it sounds like our unconscious bonding may have accidentally solved a humanitarian crisis that certain people have been working very hard to maintain. As medical staff prepared for what appeared to be the most important patient consultation in the history of interspecies medicine, Daniel thought about how his reconnaissance career had taught him to gather intelligence about potential threats. But his recovery in Lyra's care was teaching him to gather intelligence about potential solutions. He was beginning to suspect that talking in his sleep had been either the most important medical symptom of his career or the most accidental act of humanitarian heroism in the history of interspecies relations. Daniel, Lyra said, sitting in the chair beside his medical bed while privacy fields hummed around them. I need to explain exactly what you were saying during your sleep periods because the implications go far beyond simple cultural knowledge. She activated a holographic display that showed written versions of his unconscious words with translations that made Daniel's eyes widen as he realized the scope of what his subconscious mind had apparently accessed. These are the recognition codes you said, Lyra continued, highlighting specific sequences. This phrase gives access to Escape Network Alpha 7, which can transport up to 50,000 people per day through hyperspace corridors that bypass normal shipping lanes. This sequence authorizes emergency resource allocation for refugee settlements across 12 star systems. And this, she paused, pointing to a particularly complex pattern, this gives authority to override corporate shipping regulations that have been preventing refugee assistance for the past 18 months. Daniel studied the translations, recognizing strategic capabilities that could reshape humanitarian assistance throughout the contested regions. Lyra, how could my unconscious mind know information that's apparently been classified for centuries? There are several possibilities, none of which should be possible according to current understanding of human Vorthani biology. Lyra activated additional displays showing genetic analysis results. Your DNA contains markers that suggest Vorthani genetic heritage dating back approximately 300 years. That's impossible. My family history is completely documented back to Earth's colonial expansion period. Unless some of your ancestors were involved in early contact situations that were never officially recorded, Lyra highlighted genetic sequences that appeared in both human and Vorthani populations, or unless recognition codes were deliberately put into human genetic patterns through means that both our species have forgotten. Daniel felt his understanding of his own identity shifting as he processed the implications. You're suggesting that someone in my family line had contact with ancient Vorthani systems? I'm suggesting that the escape routes you accessed were designed for cooperation between our species and that recognition codes may have been preserved in both populations to ensure that humanitarian authority could be activated regardless of political circumstances. A soft chime indicated incoming priority communications. Dr. Sarah Chen's voice echoed through the medical room's communication system, carrying the kind of urgency usually reserved for medical emergencies or diplomatic crisis. Nurse Kethvani, we need immediate consultation regarding Lieutenant Carter's genetic analysis results. We're showing biological changes that shouldn't be possible through normal human Vorthani contact. Dr. Chen, Lyra replied through the communication system. Lieutenant Carter has undergone partial consort witness bonding triggered by his unconscious recitation of ancient recognition codes. The biological changes are consistent with Vorthani governmental authority protocols. Governmental authority protocols that give a human access to classified alien systems, came Director Walsh's voice through the human administrative channel. We need immediate security assessment of potential compromise to human intelligence networks. Director Walsh, Daniel replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to help communication across species barriers. I haven't compromised human intelligence networks. I've gained access to escape systems that serve humanitarian purposes for both our species. Lieutenant Carter, you have accessed alien governmental systems without authorization and accepted biological modification that creates permanent obligations to foreign authority structures. I've accepted biological modification that allows me to coordinate refugee assistance, Daniel corrected. The obligations are to humanitarian principles, not foreign political authorities. Elder Thanker's image appeared through the Vorthani communication link, his expression mixing concern with careful evaluation. Nurse Kethvani, the recognition codes Lieutenant Carter recited have been inactive for centuries. How do we explain their sudden activation? Elder Thanker, Lyra replied formally. The codes appear to have been preserved through genetic inheritance patterns that suggest deliberate preservation by both our species' ancestors. You believe this represents planned cooperation rather than accidental disclosure? I believe the escape routes were designed to serve displaced people regardless of species and that recognition codes were put into both populations to ensure humanitarian authority could be activated when needed. Through the partial bonding connection, Daniel could sense Lyra's growing certainty that their situation represented more than accidental medical complications. The recognition codes, the genetic markers, and the sophisticated escape systems all suggested planning that went beyond the political boundaries that currently separated their peoples. Lyra, Daniel said quietly, if these escape routes were designed for interspecies cooperation and if recognition codes were preserved in both our populations, what does that suggest about the conflicts that led to our current political separation? It suggests that some conflicts may have been artificially maintained to prevent the kind of cooperation that the escape systems would make possible. Lyra accessed intelligence databases through their shared connection, revealing patterns of corporate manipulation that painted a disturbing picture. Corporate interests from both species have been preventing refugee resettlement and efficient humanitarian assistance to maintain exploitable labor pools and justify increased security spending. Daniel recognized economic warfare patterns from his intelligence training. They profit from keeping displaced people trapped in situations that make them desperate enough to accept substandard employment and dangerous working conditions. Exactly. And the escape routes you've accessed could transport refugees to safe resettlement areas where they could rebuild their lives without exploitation. The medical room's proximity sensors activated, indicating approaching forces that carried the kind of tactical equipment used for military operations rather than medical consultations. Through the observation windows, Daniel could see corporate security teams and intelligence operatives positioning themselves around the medical facility. Lyra, Daniel said, processing tactical information through their enhanced connection. I think we're about to receive visitors who view our consort witness bond as either a resource to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated. The partial bonding has already given you access to escape systems that could undermine profitable refugee exploitation operations. Lyra confirmed, monitoring approaching forces through security networks. They need to either control that access or eliminate it before the bond can be made official. And if we make the bond official, then we gain permanent authority to coordinate humanitarian assistance while making ourselves permanent targets for every entity that profits from preventing such assistance. Daniel looked around the medical room that had become the center of intense political attention, understanding that his choice would determine whether the escape systems he'd unconsciously accessed would serve refugee assistance or be captured by forces that view displaced people as profitable resources rather than people deserving protection. Lyra, he said, his decision becoming clear. When I was unconscious, my subconscious mind accessed information that could help thousands of displaced families reach safety. Regardless of how I gained that access, using it to help people seems like an obvious moral choice. Even if making the bond official makes us targets for elimination by people who profit from refugee suffering? Especially then. The people trying to eliminate us are the same ones who have been preventing humanitarian assistance. If they're willing to kill to maintain that system, then the system definitely needs to be dismantled. As medical staff prepared for the most important bonding ceremony in the history of interspecies medicine, while corporate security forces coordinated assault plans against the facility, Daniel thought about how his reconnaissance career had taught him to gather intelligence about enemy capabilities. But his recovery in Lyra's care was teaching him to gather intelligence about solutions that could serve humanitarian purposes rather than military objectives. He was beginning to suspect that his unconscious recitation of ancient codes had been either the most important medical symptom in galactic history or the most accidental exposure of corporate conspiracy ever disguised as sleep-talking. The Emergency Joint Medical Conference met in Haven Point's most secure facility, where representatives from both civilizations attempted to understand how a human reconnaissance officer's medical recovery had accidentally exposed conspiracy networks that reached the highest levels of both governments while activating ancient escape systems that certain entities had spent decades ensuring remained inaccessible. Lieutenant Carter, began General Morrison, whose presence indicated that Daniel's unconscious recitations had attracted attention from Earth's highest military commands. You've gained access to alien governmental systems that could compromise human strategic interests throughout the border regions. General Morrison, Daniel replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that made understanding easier between species. I've gained access to humanitarian systems that serve both human and Vorthani refugee populations. The strategic interest they serve is preventing unnecessary suffering. Systems that include escape networks capable of transporting entire populations beyond current monitoring capabilities, Elder Thanker added, though his tone suggested concern rather than accusation. Capabilities that could destabilize carefully maintained population control throughout the contested regions. Population control, Lyra interjected, that has been systematically preventing refugee assistance while maintaining exploitable labor pools for corporate benefit. Dr. Sarachan activated displays showing the biological changes Daniel had undergone during his recovery. Lieutenant Carter, our analysis indicates that you've experienced genetic modifications that give you enhanced longevity, improved cognitive processing, and direct interface capabilities with Vorthani biotechnology. These changes appear to be permanent and progressive. Meaning what exactly? Daniel asked, though he could feel the enhanced capabilities developing as the partial bonding process continued. Meaning you're becoming something new, part human, part Vorthani, designed specifically to coordinate escape operations that neither species could manage alone, Lyra explained, monitoring his biological readings through their shared connection. And the intelligence you claim to have discovered regarding corporate manipulation? General Morrison asked. Daniel activated displays that showed evidence gathered through his enhanced access to both human and Vorthani databases, communication logs, financial records, and operational plans that revealed systematic coordination between entities that should have been opposing each other. Defense contractors and resource extraction companies from both species have been working together to maintain artificial barriers that prevent efficient refugee resettlement, Daniel said, highlighting patterns of manipulation that spanned years of careful coordination. They profit from security contracts, cheap labor, and the instability created by keeping displaced people desperate enough to accept exploitative employment. You're suggesting that our own corporations have been working with alien interests to maintain profitable refugee crises? General Morrison asked. We're proving it, Lyra replied, accessing additional intelligence through their bonded systems. Corporate coordination has been preventing activation of escape systems that could transport refugees to safe resettlement areas where they could rebuild their lives without exploitation. Elder Thanker studied the evidence with growing alarm. These intelligence reports indicate that escape systems designed to serve humanitarian purposes have been deliberately kept offline to maintain profitable instability. While refugees remain trapped in camps and exploitation zones that generate revenue for the same entities that prevent their escape to better conditions, Dr. Chen added, processing the scope of conspiracy that the bonding had revealed. A priority alert interrupted their analysis as proximity sensors detected incoming forces that carried military equipment rather than medical or diplomatic materials. Corporate security teams, intelligence operatives, and what appeared to be private military contractors were surrounding Haven Point Station from multiple directions. Daniel, Lyra said urgently, monitoring tactical displays through their enhanced consciousness. The partial bonding has exposed our location to every entity that profits from preventing refugee assistance. They're not coming to negotiate. They're coming to either capture the bonding process for exploitation or eliminate it entirely. How long do we have? Perhaps 90 minutes before coordinated assault teams can breach the medical facility's defensive systems. But the formal consort witness ceremony requires only 60 minutes to complete. And if we complete it, then we gain permanent authority to coordinate refugee assistance while making ourselves permanent targets for every organization that views displaced people as profitable resources rather than people deserving protection. Daniel looked around the medical facility that had become the center of an international crisis, understanding that his choice would determine whether the escape systems he'd unconsciously accessed would serve humanitarian purposes or be captured by forces that had been systematically preventing such assistance. Lyra, he said quietly. When I was unconscious, did you have any idea that providing medical care would lead to exposing galactic conspiracy and activating ancient escape networks? I knew that your sleep talking suggested access to systems that had been deliberately kept inactive, Lyra admitted. But I hoped that activating them might serve refugee assistance rather than corporate exploitation. And you're asking me to accept permanent biological modification and centuries of responsibility for coordinating escape systems that span multiple star systems while becoming a target for elimination by forces that view humanitarian assistance as a threat to profitable instability? I'm asking you to use whatever authority we've gained to help families who need safe passage to places where they can rebuild their lives without exploitation. Through his enhanced awareness, Daniel could sense the scope of refugee movements throughout the contested regions, families traveling through dangerous corridors, seeking safety while avoiding corporate security forces that treated unauthorized population movement as criminal activity rather than humanitarian necessity. General Morrison, Daniel said, making his decision. I'm going to complete the consort witness ceremony and make the bonding official. The authority it gives may be the only way to activate escape systems that serve people rather than profit margins. Lieutenant Carter, accepting permanent alien biological modification could constitute treason under military law. General, coordinating humanitarian assistance serves human interests better than allowing corporate manipulation to continue destabilizing entire populations while profiting from their displacement. And if the corporate forces reach your position before you can complete the ceremony? Then we'll find out whether medical facility defensive systems are adequate for protecting humanitarian bonding ceremonies against military-grade assault equipment. Elder Thanker's expression showed approval mixed with concern. Daniel Carter, accepting formal consort witness status with Nurse Kethvani gives you authority over escape systems, but it also makes you permanently responsible for the welfare of beings you may never meet personally. Elder Thanker, I became a reconnaissance officer because I believed in gathering intelligence that helps people make informed decisions about their safety. This seems like the most important intelligence coordination of my career. As they prepared for the ceremony that would either legitimize their authority to help thousands of refugees or make them targets for elimination by forces that profited from preventing such assistance, Daniel thought about how his medical recovery had taught him to gather intelligence about healing rather than combat, discovering that sometimes the most important reconnaissance involves mapping the pathways that lead people to safety rather than identifying the threats that keep them in danger. He was beginning to suspect that his unconscious recitation of ancient codes had been either the most important medical symptom in galactic history or the most elaborate form of humanitarian intelligence ever disguised as sleep talking. The formal consort witness ceremony took place in Haven Point's most advanced medical treatment chamber, where Lyra used her expertise to safely integrate Daniel's human physiology with Vorthani biotechnology while corporate assault forces approached the station through hyperspace corridors that should have been monitored by neutral zone security protocols. Are you ready for this? Lyra asked, taking his hands as medical equipment began building quantum energy fields around them. Because the formal consort witness bond creates permanent biological and legal connections that will affect every decision you make for centuries to come. I'm about as ready as someone can be for voluntarily accepting permanent biological modification to coordinate refugee assistance while corporate armies try to prevent humanitarian aid from reaching people who need help, Daniel replied, attempting to maintain perspective in a situation that felt like standing at the intersection of medicine and ancient law. Though I should probably mention that my experience with alien bonding ceremonies is limited to whatever information was in those recognition codes my unconscious mind accessed. The recognition codes contain procedural guidance for the bonding process, Lyra assured him, activating medical apparatus that would safely integrate their biological systems. Your unconscious mind apparently retained more than just access codes. It retained the knowledge necessary to complete the ceremony. The medical integration began with Daniel placing his hands on biointerfaces that connected his nervous system directly to Vorthani governmental networks, while Lyra synchronized her consciousness with his to create shared awareness that went beyond species barriers. Daniel Carter, Lyra said formally, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through both human and Vorthani medical systems. Do you accept the full consort witness bond, knowing that this choice will make you permanently responsible for refugee assistance that goes beyond political boundaries? I do, Daniel replied, feeling quantum energy building around them as the medical equipment helped with biological integration that would give him enhanced capabilities. And I promise to use our shared authority to serve displaced people rather than corporate interests, to coordinate escape assistance regardless of the political complications, and to maintain systems that serve humanitarian purposes rather than profit margins. And I accept you as consort witness, Lyra said, giving you permanent access to Vorthani escape networks while binding myself to support your decisions regarding refugee assistance regardless of the personal risks they create. The ceremony's completion triggered automatic activation of escape routes throughout both territories, while the biological integration gave Daniel capabilities that went beyond normal human limitations. His awareness expanded to include governmental networks spanning multiple star systems, providing real-time coordination of refugee movements while revealing the full scope of corporate conspiracy that had been preventing such assistance. But more than expanded governmental access, he felt fundamental changes in his biology, enhanced longevity that would allow him to maintain refugee assistance operations across decades of coordination, improved neuroprocessing that could handle the complexity of interspecies humanitarian logistics, and direct interface capabilities that made him as much a part of the escape networks as the technology itself. Warning, announced the medical facility's AI, its voice now harmonizing with Vorthani systems. Multiple hostile forces breaching station defensive perimeter. Escape protocols recommend immediate activation of all available refugee assistance networks. Activate emergency escape routes, Daniel said, his voice carrying through governmental systems that now span both civilizations. Priority transport for families in corporate security zones, with secondary routes for anyone seeking resettlement assistance. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Hidden escape corridors opened throughout the contested regions, providing transport capacity that made normal refugee assistance look primitive by comparison. Ancient Vorthani transportation networks came online that could move displaced people to safety faster than corporate forces could coordinate suppression efforts. This is remarkable, Dr. Chen's voice came through the communication links, monitoring the activation from multiple observation posts. The escape capacity alone could handle population displacement on a scale that makes current humanitarian assistance look inadequate, and the coordination systems operate completely outside normal detection methods. General Morrison added, these networks could coordinate refugee assistance while remaining invisible to hostile surveillance. Through their shared consciousness, Daniel and Lyra coordinated escape operations while monitoring the approach of corporate assault forces whose mission was to prevent exactly the kind of humanitarian assistance they were now providing. Director Walsh, came a voice through the corporate communication channels. The enhanced networks are interfering with population control operations throughout the border regions. Request immediate authorization for elimination protocols. Director Walsh, Daniel replied through their hybrid governmental system. You're experiencing refugee assistance operations that serve civilian welfare rather than corporate profit margins. Your population control operations are no longer relevant to humanitarian priorities. The final confrontation was brief and decisive. Corporate assault forces found themselves facing not just enhanced medical capabilities, but automated defensive systems that had been specifically designed to protect refugee assistance operations against military interference. Their weapons stopped working when they tried to target the medical facility. Their communications were jammed by networks that treated profit-motivated attacks on humanitarian assistance as irrelevant noise. And their assault equipment was systematically disabled by technologies that prioritize civilian protection over corporate security concerns. This is impossible, Director Walsh's voice crackled through damaged communication equipment as her forces retreated in disorder. No individual medical facility should have this level of defensive authority. Director Walsh, Daniel replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through escape networks spanning multiple star systems. You're not dealing with individual authority anymore. You're dealing with consort witnesses who have access to systems designed to ensure that refugee assistance serves people rather than profit margins. The conspiracy's exposure triggered investigations throughout both civilizations, revealing coordination between corporate and military entities that had been systematically preventing humanitarian assistance while maintaining exploitable refugee populations. The escape networks, once activated, operated on their own to transport displaced families to safety while broadcasting evidence that made suppression impossible. 6 months later, consort witness Lieutenant Daniel Carter Kathvani stood in the Joint Coordination Center that had been established to manage the permanent integration of human and Vorthani refugee assistance networks. The hyphenated name had been Lyra's suggestion, representing the new form of existence they'd created together, neither purely human nor traditionally Vorthani, but something designed specifically to serve escape systems that went beyond political boundaries. The consort witness bond had evolved beyond its original purpose, becoming less about governmental authority and more about permanent responsibility for ensuring that medical facilities and escape networks served refugee assistance rather than corporate surveillance. Daniel's military expertise had expanded to include direct interface with biotechnological systems that operated according to principles human science was still learning to understand, while his enhanced capabilities allowed him to coordinate assistance operations that ordinary human physiology couldn't sustain. Any regrets? Lyra asked, joining him at the coordination displays where escape routes showed constant movement of families reaching safety through networks that had been waiting for proper authorization. Well, Daniel said thoughtfully, I do miss the simplicity of routine reconnaissance missions, where the most complex decision was whether unusual energy signatures constituted equipment malfunction or actual security threats. As opposed to serving as a mortal consort witness to alien medical nobility while coordinating escape networks that span dozens of star systems and maintaining refugee assistance relationships with beings whose biology operates according to quantum medical principles. Daniel pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt to share consciousness with someone whose medical knowledge had become inseparable from his own governmental access. Though I have to say the enhanced awareness has some unexpected benefits. Such as being able to detect refugee medical emergencies before they develop into humanitarian crises requiring emergency escape. It's much more effective to prevent displacement than to coordinate escape after families have already lost their homes to corporate resource extraction. And the extended lifespan is remarkably useful for developing the kind of long-term medical relationships that make interspecies cooperation sustainable across decades rather than just individual medical emergencies. Daniel grinned, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came with using enhanced capabilities for purposes that actually mattered. Plus, it gives us time to really perfect these escape medical protocols. Though it does mean centuries of shared responsibility for maintaining medical networks that serve beings we may never treat personally. Minor detail. We've got quantum escape systems, biomedical integration, and joint authority over refugee assistance networks that can coordinate emergency medical care for entire populations during displacement crises. How hard can galactic humanitarian medicine be? Lyra's laugh carried harmonics that resonated through the coordination center's hybrid medical systems, creating ripple effects that enhanced the efficiency of operations throughout the network. Daniel, your optimism remains one of your most endearing human characteristics. My optimism and my apparently unique ability to unconsciously recite ancient recognition codes while recovering from exotic radiation exposure. That was the most fortunate medical symptom in recorded history. As they stood together monitoring escape operations that coordinated medical support for refugee populations across multiple star systems, Daniel thought about the strange turns his military career had taken. He'd started as a reconnaissance officer, trained to gather intelligence about potential threats. But the consort witness bond had taught him to gather intelligence about potential solutions. The conspiracy they'd exposed had been completely dismantled, its architects facing justice, while the artificial barriers they'd maintained gave way to genuine cooperation. Escape networks now operated as permanent infrastructure, using combined human and Vorthani medical technologies to provide assistance that neither species could have managed alone. "There's something I should tell you," Lyra said, her mental voice carrying harmonics of excitement mixed with anticipation. "More cosmic medical responsibilities I haven't discovered yet? More opportunities. The escape networks we've activated don't just serve this sector. They connect to similar medical systems maintained by other species throughout the galaxy. We're part of a much larger network of beings who have chosen to dedicate their extended lifespans to coordinating refugee medical assistance rather than exploiting displacement." Daniel considered this revelation. So, not only did we accidentally become the most important humanitarian medical partnership in local space, we're also part of a galactic network of refugee medical assistance coordination? Essentially, yes. The consort witness bond can interface with similar medical protocols maintained by dozens of species whose cultures include permanent commitments to civilian medical assistance during displacement crises. "No pressure at all," Daniel said with a grin. "Just the responsibility for coordinating refugee medical assistance across multiple galaxies while maintaining treatment relationships with beings whose idea of routine medical care involves manipulating stellar radiation patterns to create therapeutic environments for displaced populations. We could start with the Andromedian emergency medical protocols," Lyra suggested helpfully. "They've been requesting assistance with escape medical coordination for 17 worlds experiencing solar radiation exposure that requires interspecies treatment expertise." Solar radiation medical escape coordination. Galactic refugee medical networks. Centuries-long partnerships with alien medical nobility whose idea of routine treatment involves quantum consciousness medical integration. Daniel nodded slowly. 6 months ago, I would have asked whether you were serious. Now, I'm just wondering whether we need to pack special medical equipment for treating beings whose biology involves controlled stellar radiation absorption. The Andromedians are quite practical medically, actually, and they have excellent escape medical protocols. I think you'll appreciate their approach to large-scale population medical protection during displacement. Will there be more chances for me to accidentally reshape galactic politics through unconscious recitation of ancient medical codes during recovery from exotic radiation exposure? Almost certainly. Perfect. I was getting bored with simply preventing interstellar conflicts through quantum medical consciousness sharing with alien nurses. As their coordination center managed another successful medical escape, this time providing emergency medical care for families fleeing corporate resource extraction operations to worlds where they could rebuild their health without exploitation, Daniel thought about how his reconnaissance career had taught him to gather intelligence about threats, but the consort witness bond had taught him to gather intelligence about healing. The ability to unconsciously access ancient recognition codes had led him to the most important responsibility of any lifetime, ensuring that medical and escape systems served beings who needed assistance regardless of what species they belonged to or what political boundaries they needed to cross to reach safety. "Lyra," he said, watching another medical transport full of refugees emerge safely from hyperspace. "I think this might be the most important medical treatment I've ever had the privilege to receive. Even though it began with you unconsciously reciting ancient codes you shouldn't have known? Especially because it began that way. Sometimes the most important medical discoveries are the ones that happen when you're unconscious, revealing information that makes healing possible between people who thought they had nothing in common except the need to help others survive. And even though it involves permanent biological modification and centuries of medical responsibility, Maybe the most important healing happens when you accept responsibility for treating people you've never met in places you may never visit for reasons that go beyond individual advantage or species loyalty. As they traveled toward their next coordination mission, helping establish medical escape networks for species whose biology operated according to quantum principles that made conventional treatment impossible, Daniel and Lyra continued their work as consort witnesses, knowing that their unconscious bonding had accidentally solved the most important humanitarian crisis in galactic history while creating the most elaborate form of medical romance ever disguised as sleep talking.